Well, welcome to The Perspective. I'm Lorie, and I'm delighted to be here. How's your day going so far? I hope it's going really well. But let me ask you a question. Are you waiting for something? The other day I was a little hungry, actually a lot hungry, and I stuck some warmed up dinner in my microwave, and I literally was getting annoyed that it was taking a minute and a half to warm up. I mean, come on, like how impatient can we be to even warm up our food these days? The reality is we're all waiting for something. And it's not just food in the microwave. It could be for that spouse, that job, maybe that child. Well, today we're going to talk about what it means to wait. And we're going to learn from a wonderful guest. And I want to welcome today Rebecca George to the show. She's an author, a speaker, a coach, and the host of the Radical Radiance podcast. Rebecca is passionate about helping others pursue their God-given calling in a way that builds the kingdom. And she's the author of Do the Thing. I love that title. And her latest book is You're Not Too Late. And it encourages us to trust God in the seasons of waiting and disappointment. Rebecca lives in East Tennessee with her husband, Dustin. And I'm so excited to welcome her to the show today. Welcome, Rebecca, to The Perspective.
Oh, Lori, I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I don't know if you get impatient like me when I'm hungry waiting on the microwave, but
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a pretty sad statement, isn't it? But in your new book, Rebecca, You're Not Too Late, you offer such a timely and actually tender message for anyone that's actually struggling or
Yeah.
wrestling with waiting and disappointment. So can you share the personal journey that led you to write this book and how your own story of actually longing and waiting shaped the message?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting to look back, Lori, because my first book, as you mentioned, was called Do the Thing. It was a very fun message to write and to talk about connecting the gifts and talents God has given us with how we're bringing glory to Him in our work every day. I loved that conversation. But as I started to dream about what was next for me and what I felt led to write about next, I honestly thought this book initially was a book on singleness. I got married later in my 20s and was a bridesmaid 12 times before I married my husband. And just kind of in retrospect, I felt like I had a lot to say to single women later in their 20s and their 30s who might be wrestling with this season of waiting. But as I talked to other women in my life, as I began looking back over the course of my life as well, I realized that waiting and longing didn't end for me when I married Dustin. It just looked different. Right. And so I think as I stepped back, I began to realize that whether it's a relational need in our lives, our desire to be married, to have children, to see a relationship reconciled or restored, to take the next step in our careers or get involved in a ministry, whatever it looks like, we all navigate and grapple with longing, myself included. And there are so many challenges in that. And we talk about that in the book. Each chapter kind of walks us through one of those. But it was interesting to whittle that list down. I chose 10. I could have written about many more challenges that I have walked through, certainly in my own seasons of waiting. But that's kind of where the message came from.
I really appreciate your vulnerability. And we know that people connect when we are real, right? And
Yeah.
you really share so many parts of your life. And to your point, you're writing about unmet desires, like whether it's that spouse, like that you said that journey of you waiting on finding your spouse, right? Or
Mhm.
having a child or clarity in your calling. These can actually be, and I love this, a holy invitation. That is so beautiful. How have you seen God show up in those waiting in between moments in your own life then?
Yeah. I don't know about you, Lori, but as I look back over my life, the moments when I have seen the most spiritual growth, when I've had some of the sweetest moments in my relationship with the Lord, when He's grown me and refined me, it has usually been in those seasons of longing, in those seasons of waiting, or in kind of a valley where I've had nowhere else to turn but to Him, right? And so whether it be in those long seasons of singleness that I write a lot about in the book or other seasons of waiting, I do think it's been a gift in retrospect. We can always say that in hindsight, kind of looking in the rearview mirror, but God has been so kind and has been so faithful to show me, oh, this was why it was not my plan for you to be married at 24 and have all your babies by 30. I actually had these things to show you, and in the waiting, I learned so much more of who God is, and I think that deepens our hope in him in the future, right? Like when I now experience longing towards the future, because again, that's not ended for me or for you or for anyone listening, I can then recount God's faithfulness in the past. I can look back and say, "Oh, this is how I saw God be faithful to me. This is what I learned about him in that. That's how I saw him show up."
Yeah.
And that gives my heart so much hope in that, doesn't it for you?
Oh, absolutely. And what I hear you saying, it's not even like you're right. Hindsight is 2020. So you can look back and say, "Oh, now I know why," or how God uses. But what I hear you saying is that you actually experience God in a
Yes.
more intimate, tangible way because of the waiting. Is that true?
Totally. Absolutely. I share this in the book, and I'll give the brief version. My husband and I went to Israel the first year we were married, and a theme of that trip was olive trees. We saw olive trees absolutely everywhere we
Right.
went.
Yeah.
And I noticed in my husband, his wheels were turning. He's the green thumb guy of the George family. I'm not a gardener, but he is. And I saw him researching different species of olive trees as we went along our trip. And he discovered this olive tree called the Arbequina that would actually survive if cared for, appropriately in the climate where we were living at the time in Mississippi. But one interesting thing that he learned about the Arbequina was a term called chill hours. And what that means is every olive tree species has a certain number of hours that it has to withstand in colder temperatures in order for it to bear fruit. If it has too many, it won't bear fruit, but also if it doesn't have enough, it will not bear fruit. And we got home from Israel. He planted a baby arbequina in our backyard. And in the couple of years that followed, we watched it leaf out. And as I was praying through this book and considering these kind of moments in the dark, wondering how God would show up or how he might meet me in the middle of that longing, I kept thinking back on that term of chill hours. And I
Mhm.
actually write about this in the book because I think that feels a lot like us
Yeah.
in our waiting. I would just love to escape chill hours altogether
Right.
and still produce spiritual fruit in my life.
Yeah.
But as I look back over my life, I can see and know and take confidence in the fact that God knows exactly the number of chill hours I need to become more
Mm.
like Jesus. And
Oh,
he
I
works in each one of those in such a beautiful way. And again, we can see that in hindsight, but it gives me a lot of, again, hope and I think joy in him as I look to the future and knowing that he's sovereign over every one of those details.
well, I'm gonna hold on to that term "chill hours." I think that's so
You and me both,
good.
Lori.
That is so good. Like, God is working in the waiting and actually requires those pauses, those chill hours to grow us and deepen our roots in Him, right? One of the
That's right.
powerful sections of your book walks readers through real life struggles like, let's get honest, envy, isolation, even doubt, right? So, how do you begin to break the cycle of comparison, especially when it feels like everyone else is moving on in life, right? While we're praying for
Yeah.
that thing to come.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple things. One, many times we elevate that desire that's often a God given desire, the desire for marriage, the desire to grow in our careers with excellence to the glory of God, the desire to have a child. All of those are good desires. But many times we elevate those to a place of prominence meant for God alone, which, hello, is idolatry, right? Many times we do that in our hearts with good intentions to start out with. But our hearts know when we've done that. So that's the one kind of guardrail I would give us as we consider these struggles of envy and comparison. And the practical advice I would give with envy, particularly, is to remember that, let's say, I'll run with the having a kid example. Let's say you are desiring to have a baby and your best friend gets pregnant. Her win, her blessing is not your loss, right? And God's blessing in her life and his work in her life is not to the exclusion of how he's working in yours. And I think recognizing that and being willing to hold both the grief of your desire and the celebration of a friend or family member is a really important tension that we have to hold this side of eternity.
That is so helpful. Her win is not your loss. I really think that's important, and not like to, in a sense, making an idol of the things
That's
that we
right.
desire. That is critical for any of us, no matter the age, stage, or desire of our life. Well, we're going to be right back with Rebecca. I'm loving this conversation. Whatever you're waiting for, whatever you're longing for, maybe you need some prayer right now. Would you just reach out to us? The number's on the screen to call our prayer line, and we're here for you. We want to minister to you. So give us a call, and we'll be right back. Well, we're back with Rebecca George, author, speaker, podcaster. And I love, Rebecca, how open and vulnerable you've been with your life and your story, especially in your latest book, because we are all waiting and longing for something. And I love that your book includes practical tools from renewing our thought life to forming life giving habits. This is just so helpful. What's one practice that actually helped you move from discouragement in your waiting to deeper trust in God during a waiting season?
Oh, I love that question, Lori. And the one that just initially jumps back out at me that I'm so glad we got to include in the book was a piece of me navigating my own longing was recognizing that I could take that to the Lord and be really open and honest about it. I grew up in the South, and I think part of our sweet Southern culture is we love to just always be fine and good. And I would almost apply that same idea to my relationship with God without recognizing, oh, I can be really honest with him and transparent with him about where my heart is. He knows that anyway in his infinite wisdom and knowledge. And so the Psalms actually really helped me with that, Lori, and just recognizing as I read different psalmists and David crying out to the Lord in their distress or in their season of waiting. And one particular passage that helped me was in Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. It says, "Search my heart, O God. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. And if there be a grievous way in me, lead me in the way everlasting." And Lori, I kind of began using that passage as a prayer prompt of sorts with my own seasons of waiting. If I would be struggling, let's say with envy, as we talked about a moment ago, or maybe doubting if God would ever show up or struggling to experience his joy, I would just be honest before the Lord and say, God, would you examine my heart? Would you search my heart? Would you show me the areas of how I'm thinking about this season of waiting in a way that's contrary to what your word says, in a way that's contrary to your perspective on the situation? And would you lead me back to truth in that? Would you give me your perspective? And I think that prompt taken straight from scripture was one of the most helpful things to me in my own seasons of longing.
That is so good, Rebecca. I mean, this show is called The Perspective,
Yes.
and honestly, I do think that's what the Word of God does. And when we come honestly to God, as the psalmist does, He does give us a fresh perspective. It doesn't mean all the problems. It doesn't mean you stopped waiting. I mean, you're still in a season of waiting for a child. And that journey for you is real, right? And you coach many women to pursue their passions, for the kingdom. What do you say to the person who feels like they've maybe missed their chance or it's too late to step into
Mhm.
this God-given purpose that God has for them?
Yeah. I mean, I think if anyone listening, and if we're still drawing breath, God has a purpose for us. He has plans for us as a follower of Christ as we journey through a broken world, awaiting for that day where he comes back or we take our last breath and he comes back and restores all things. That will happen one day, but now in the middle of a broken world, we navigate that brokenness and that causes us to feel too late for our lives sometimes. But I also think that is a really creative ploy of the enemy to distract us from God's plans for us. And if I'm really honest, Lori, just got sick of that being a really easy button for the enemy to push. Right. And I think if I look at most women in my life, that is a similar sentiment that we could all say at times. I feel too late for my life. I feel like I've missed it. I feel like I'm too late. I feel behind. when in fact, if we were to step back and see things from God's vantage point, which we can't this side of heaven, but if we could, I think we would see that he has great plans for us, that he is in control, that we could see his kindness at every turn, that we could see his faithfulness at every step. And I'm just constantly going back to, God, would you just give me your perspective in this? Would you help me not miss your plans for me in this season, even if it's different than how I would have written the story, right? And it oftentimes will be, but recognizing that his goodness, his faithfulness, his in controlness does not hinge on me getting the thing I want. It's always true. And so knowing that actually gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah.
That I'm actually not the sovereign one. I'm actually not the one with all wisdom and understanding, but praise God that we are surrendered to a life serving the God who is. And doesn't that give us a lot of freedom to keep our eyes open to how he's working without getting caught up in that, you know?
Yeah, 100%. You know what the advantage of getting older? I'll give you a little hint. You get a real perspective. There's that word again. You can see that as you got older, obviously have more years to look back and see the faithfulness and sovereignty of God and the many ways that he worked out his plans in his timing and in his ways, which are not always our ways, right? Or our timing, but it makes you rest in that. So as I get
Mm.
older, I just think, well, clearly, like God is going to work these things out in my life in a way that he knows is best. And it actually, as you get older, you get a little more freed up from that,
Yeah.
which I think
I look forward to that.
there you go, look forward to getting older. I love that you're a podcaster, your podcast, Radical Radiance, it's all about reflecting the heart of Jesus, really, in everything you do. What have you learned about radiating Christ while wrestling through your own delays, like in this moment, waiting for a baby to come?
Yeah, totally. We ask one question at the end of every interview that we do on the podcast. As I've told you before we hit record, we're almost 400 episodes in. And a verse that God gave me as I was naming the show was Psalm 34:5. And it says, "Those who look to him are radiant and their faces are never covered in shame." And so I ask the question at the end of every interview, what about Jesus makes you radiant? And it's so interesting to see how different people will answer that, how God might be stirring in their hearts as they read his word, as they dig into community and all of those things. Or maybe they've written a message that God's shown them something particular about that. And over 400 times, I've heard people wrestle with that and answer the question. And I have too myself in and out of different seasons. And I think that's such a helpful question to ask ourselves, right? Is as I study his word, as I uh, walk in community, as I continue on this path of following Jesus, what about him as I look to him, as Psalm 34, verse 5 tells us, makes me radiant? And so I think that is always changing as we know more of who he is. That's certainly been true in my life. In this season, I'm so thankful that God doesn't change. And uh, everything else we know to be true about him doesn't change either.
Yeah.
And I think that makes me radiant. That's the thing that I've been stirring on lately. And so I love that I get to talk about that all the time.
That's beautiful. Well done on over 400 episodes of your podcast. 1 minute left. What would you like to share with someone who's listening that feels like maybe they've missed out or they're waiting? What would you say to them?
Yeah, there's a statement in the introduction of the book that says, "This is for the hopefuls, the almost but not yets, the crushed in defeat, the stunned by a lack of progress, and the weary woman ready to hang up her jersey." And if that feels like you and you're listening today, it probably feels like many of us. God still has plans for your life, and you are not too late for them, even though we live in the middle of a hurry up world. So lift your eyes, continue to look to him, trust in him, even in the meanwhile.
I just love that. Rebecca, bless you as you continue to steward your life, your message, the waiting, all the things that God
Yeah.
has for you. Thank you for joining us today on The Perspective.
Thank you, Lorie. I'm so grateful.